Let's talk some baseball. We've got Doug Glanville in the city last week calling the Phillies Mets game. And if he's here, we're going to talk to him. Former Philly broadcaster, writer, whatever other title he would like to have, advocate. Doug Glanville, thanks for joining us, man.
Always great to be on the Heart of Sports, one of my favorites. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We love getting to talk with you. Obviously, you've been following the Phillies. I mean, you follow the Phillies anyway, but to prep for the Phillies Mets game from Sunday night last week, talk to us a little bit about what you've seen from this team as you get ready, and then Jeff and I'll ask you questions.
The Phillies are fascinating because you know that Dave Dombrowski, who's running the show, is always very aggressive, and there's no question, nobody will ever question his desire to win and the will that he has to make any move possible for the future, for whatever, to win today. And he's really set that tone everywhere he's been. And no different here when you have a popular manager like Rob Thompson and you say, you got to go, and then they've kind of responded generally. Certainly it helps having Zach Wheeler get healthy, and they put themselves in a position to be able to allow him to make more moves. As he gets to the trade deadline. So that's how I see them. I mean, if you look at the numbers, you say, well, their offense isn't exactly stellar. It's not, the pitching isn't like lights out, but they've headed sort of in the right direction. And whether it's emerging players or just trying to combine guys finding their skills from yesteryear, they're doing well enough to be in the picture. And then now it's a matter of getting hot. So you can't hang your hat saying, hey, this is the best team in baseball right now. But you can look and say, they get hot, they get the right pieces. This team is going to make a lot of noise.
Your most recent article on Substack is about the slump. And we have a pitcher right now in Andrew Painter who's suffering through, I guess you could call it a slump. He's
Mhm.
now been sent to the minors. What's your advice to him? And tell us a little bit about how you got the inspiration for writing about the slump.
I mean, I think, well, the slump kind of came from a lot of discussions. And I started just thinking about it and saying, well, how do you even define it? Because I know the feeling of like statistically saying you're two for your last 30 or something like that. But then I thought about being in the batter's box, and there's times you felt great and went 0 for 5, and there's times you felt terrible and got 3 hits. It's a strange phenomenon. And then there's the metrics of it, and then there's the mechanics of it as well. And every player has different ways to try to get out of it, and it's not usually a snap your fingers solution. It's usually kind of incremental. And I recognized it made me think back to my career, and I said, well, it's hard to get out of a slump if you're not in the lineup. so it becomes this cycle of you need the coverage and the patience and the environment to be able to work through it. And sometimes that's because you have three other guys who have 40 home runs and hitting 300. You don't need to hit because you're the center fielder that year. So it really matters. It's so environmental, and it's so much more than like you against the world. You recognize that you need a runway to work through it. And over time, you find drills and things that help you reset. And I know, I got to talk to Craig Counsell, and he's the one who kind of made me say, I really got to finish writing this because he was talking about Alex Bregman. And he said, Bregman is a mechanical being. Everything is mechanics. He's like, if I do this, if I tilt my shoulder, if I get it, and he's going to fix it that way. And he's going to keep grinding at it until it feels right. And that's when he determines like he's approaching his slump. Where other people need to go to the spa, they need to go to a meditation chamber. So I thought I wanted to write it because I felt it was a term that was blanketed and that had so much nuance underneath it that it really wasn't one stop fits all. You really had to kind of think about all the elements around it, not just the fact that your numbers tell you so.
So, how do you get out of it? I mean, obviously, that's not a simple answer. You write about how the different ways about the idea of a spa or going through it. How do you figure out if you were coaching? How do you help a player like Andrew Painter find his way out of something that is partly in their head?
Well, all right. The tough thing about Painter
Mm-hmm.
is it's partly reflective of the game today. You have a lot of young guys that just get there really quickly. And you don't know if you have the body of work to be able to reference that sometimes helps you get out of the slump. It's easy to go to Trey Turner and say, hey, dude, you'll be all right, because the dude's won batting titles. So you're like, oh, okay, be
Last
this
year.
guy, right? Be this guy, right? So when you don't have the guy yet to reference, you're kind of talking about potential and possibility and opportunity and all these things that are not always as tangible, even to the player. So yeah, you can go back to college, you can go back to being a minor league prospect, a top 100, whatever. But in the end, like, you need the confidence to reference what you've done. And until you've done it, just for your own sort of support, you're trying to, know what your reference point is. So I think a guy like Painter there's talent, there's examples of him. I called the game that he pitched, and I'm like, okay, this guy's got a million pitches, and he can work up, down. So that there's ability. And for him, it's a lot about consistency and not worrying about, okay, I'm in AAA or whatever. He's just got to get like a ritual around it. And whatever that is, whether it's mechanics or whether it's meditation or whether it's like, I don't know, walk your dog or something, you find something. And I don't think there's one set, formula even for that individual player, because you do need time. You need time. You need a runway. And the tough thing about guys that shoot through the minors and get to the top is that they're still getting coached extensively at the big league level, and they're not really sure exactly what to reference other than like, I should be good. They're telling me I should be good. And until you get in the box, 100,000 times, it's kind of hard to make that a hard and fast rule.
The additional thing with him is, coming off the surgery, it just doesn't seem like his fastball has the run that it did. So he's throwing it up there and it looks more like a beach ball, and they're putting it in the seats. And I wanted to tie that to Aaron Nola and something that Jose Alvarado said this week. After Alvarado got hit again, he said through his interpreter, hitters feel confident that they can hit against me. It seems like 100 miles an hour is something that they see a lot at this level. It's not surprising anymore. Is the increase in speed in pitching with the Mizorowskis and guys like that, and the fact that so many people sit at 98, 99, 100 now, making the guys that don't get up there have that much more of a challenge because the guys are used to seeing it and this is a slower opportunity?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that the speed, it gets normalized. And, part of it, I was describing this to my son not too long ago. I was saying, well, okay, I remember when I first faced 85 and it looked like a blur. It looked like I was throwing sunflower seeds at me. And then 85 just became whatever, like, and eventually it's 90 and then it's 95. And I think these hitters can time kind of anything, especially when you're not locating it. I mean, and I think the thing is, like, Mizorowski is kind of in a different category because this guy's like hitting corners and he's up in the zone. He knows he's like pitching. But if you're throwing 100 and you're just like hit the target, and if it hits the corner, great. Those guys, it's hard to be consistent, and eventually the timing catch up to you. Now, yeah, they have a lot of movement, they have a lot of spin and shapes and all these things. But when you see it over and over and over and over, it does slow down for you. And then you need Mizorowski throwing 103, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's another. So I don't know where it stops, if it ever does. But familiarity definitely is part of the game, and these hitters can time pretty much anything. You get the foot down, and you work from there.
We now have had almost half a season of the challenge this year. What's your impression of the challenge and how batters and hitters have adjusted to it?
Yeah, I like the challenge system. I mean, I think what you end up with anything else is, once you have the technology that everybody can see on the scoreboard, on their phone, it's hard to be like, no, we can't see that, So eventually, instant replay, you had to do something. And the task for baseball, Major League Baseball, is to figure out how to do it responsibly, in a way that keeps the game flowing, a game that's not confrontational, in a system that actually makes sense. Like, having the strike zone at the front of the plate didn't make sense because the curveball was coming from the sky and hitting the dirt. So there became this almost feel to how to create the technology around it, and that was really interesting. Now, I think you find, first of all, the umpires, as we've really known, are excellent at what they do. The pitchers are this much off. The fact that every game there's a guy shrugging, going, oh, I might challenge, I might not, tells you how hard it is, because they're so close. We had we had JT Realmuto come on our podcast recently. It was perfect because I've just been looking into this about how many pitchers or hitters or catchers flinch like they're going to challenge and then don't because it's so close. Well, the Phillies actually counted how many times Realmuto flinched and didn't challenge, and he was right 80% of the time on the calls that he didn't challenge. So they were like, you need to challenge more. He's like, yeah, but it was 2-0 count. It didn't, I was looking at the situation. So there's the strategy of it and the fact that the umpires are actually just fantastic on how close these pitches are. And I think it's made a better relationship with the umpires because the players know how really hard it is and how close it is even when they challenge and win.
Wait, so is JT overthinking it at this point? We know how intelligent a catcher he is.
He's so good at it.
Yeah, is he overthinking it at this point? Should he just trust his instinct?
Well, that's what they were trying to say to him, that you should trust it more. And his pushback was that, yeah, but I also have to look at situational. Like, okay, I mean, fine, 3-0 count, challenge. Okay, yeah, I guess I could if it's a walk. And, but I think he was trying to figure out the best rhythm of it. And I do wonder, like, at a certain point, if you challenge an umpire 30 times on, and you're up 10-1, and, it's like, I don't know. I think it gets a little dicey, but they were trying to tell him to challenge more because the question becomes this: is it better to be 17 for 20, or is it better to be 23 for 30? Right? I mean, it's like, is it more, and it's just better to just have the volume, or you want accuracy? And I generally think you want more, but I also think the accuracy helps you in the flow of the game with your pitcher, the confidence, and also even your relationship with the umpire. And these are the fun things that are kind of starting to percolate from just watching ABS for a few months now.
Well, it seems like the game situation would matter too. I mean, I took the kids the other night and you had three challenges in the first inning and a half. And,
Yeah.
If you're taking that 80% chance in the first inning, that might be different than in the seventh or eighth inning when you still have the challenges left and it becomes more consequential in the game, right?
Well, you also have to think about both sides of the ball. Like, okay, you want to leave something for your pitcher, your cat. It's like, what inning is it? So it does matter. And one funny story is when we started the season, we asked ABS questions every weekend. I just talked to players. So we had Corbin Carroll on, who's known for his strike zone and getting burned on the high pitch. So Carroll is like, oh man, listen, you know what? I'm not going to challenge early in the game because I really want to make sure it's not an ego thing. I want to make sure I give it and have room for the pitchers later in the game. So he goes into this long thing. So he told his manager, Torey Lovello, that Corbin Carroll was explaining that he wants to wait and be patient. First inning, first at bat, he challenges. I don't know. I mean, he dove right in, and he was right. But it was it was one of those things where if you get burned on an 0-2 count and you're walking back to the dugout, it's hard to let that go. And so you realize that there's an emotional side. So pretty much all the teams say pitchers shouldn't challenge because they're the worst at it. And they 100% have said that. And the other thing I've learned that was fascinating is that even hitters that are typically more disciplined, have a higher walk rate, they have kind of blind spots. So Stephen Kwan was like, well, that pitch up and away, I'm not as sure about challenging that one versus the one inside. And the last one that really hit me in the face was the top of the zone, particularly north-south, is the one that's the hardest because that is, you think about what the zone is, right? This is your zone, your personal zone. Doug Glanville going around baseball, carrying my zone with me, and the umpires are calling it. That is very different than, Frank Pulley's zone, home plate umpire, who was 6 inches a little wide in, and it was shaped around kind of his sensibility. Now you have a universal zone for the player, and people are trying to feel for what that zone is at the top and the bottom in particular, because the edges are the edges. The top and bottom are like your height, your this, whatever. So that inexactness makes pitchers throw to the top of the zone and go, well, is that a strike or is that his strike? Or versus like, I'm throwing to this target, the catcher and the umpire, and that's what it is. I know the top of the zone. So it's made it really interesting about throwing to the top of the zone for chase as opposed to throwing to get the call. And that is very different than until ABS came into play.
Somebody who it doesn't seem like it matters where they throw it who's making contact right now is Brandon Marsh. And he's somebody
Oh,
on this show who we've talked about a lot for years because of Jeff's love for Logan O'Hoppe. So it became like an unofficial comparison for us of how is O'Hoppe doing? How is Marsh doing? I got a text from Jeff a few weeks ago that I never thought I'd get, that Brandon Marsh might be have to be considered for an all-star. Not that he
right.
shouldn't actually be considered, but the fact that Jeff was saying that was a big breakthrough for us. Talk to us about the season that Brandon Marsh is having right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've paid attention to Marsh a lot, and because I'm really cool with Marsh, and I'll shoot him a text once in a while. He was always very gracious and just talking and being open, and so I was always looking at his game, and I was like, gosh, this guy seems like he could be better. Like I like his approach. He's got power the other way. I just was kind of like, there's more here, and the contact rate should be different. That's just what I kept seeing with Marsh. Now, his BABIP, his ability to get hits on balls in play is beyond like what you would expect, right? I mean, there's some luck involved, but the fact that he's actually putting it in play and having such success, I was always just watching his approach, particularly staying on the ball, and I was like, gosh, he should hit lefties. He should go the other way. So to me, it was a marvel that he wasn't better, and he was swinging and missing as much as he was. So I think he's much more this player. I mean, yeah, the numbers are incredible, but I see a guy that just keeps improving and just finally getting the contact and a little bit of luck of it falling in, but also a guy that probably should have been able to make more contact and good contact.
I Before the season, we had the outcry over is Bryce Harper elite. Everybody has to watch their words. What do you say? Jeff and I had our ears perk up last week when Don Mattingly was asked about the team's defense, and he had some critiques of Bryce's defense at first base. Now, obviously, there's nobody more qualified to critique somebody's play at first base than Don Mattingly. But given everything that had happened, it raised our attention. Your thoughts on Mattingly's comments, Bryce at first, and everything else that goes along with that?
Yeah, I mean, well, Bryce Harper, look, we know he learned this position, and there's been blocks of time where he's had very good metrics at first base, and I think he's been able to pick balls, and not an easy transition, by the way, but I think he's done it pretty well. The funny thing about talking to Bryce about his defense, I started to notice during the postseason a couple of years ago that whenever there was a mound visit, Bryce Harper was like in right field. He never
Yeah.
came to the mound. So one day I said, "Hey man, like what's going on? Like when they visit the mound, you're a first baseman. He's like, I have nothing to add. Like I don't know enough. So he was just kind of humbly trying to get to a place that this was like his position where he could lead from. And for a while it was out of position, so to speak. The thing about Harper is that, and Dave Dombrowski is fearless about this. He's like, okay, you got the contract, you wanted an extension. I'm gonna hold you accountable. To match the numbers, you have to be this guy, not this guy. And there's no question people play against Harper. They know like at any moment, this guy could rattle off 3 home runs in a row. So he has certainly the elite presence, if nothing else. But I know that the speed, the bat speed, all this stuff is still there. It's just finding a way to, first of all, as you get older, to stay healthy and all these things that start to nag at you. But they're going to keep challenging him, and they're going to be unapologetic because he is the anchor. They believe in him. They know he's been MVP. They know he still has all-star capabilities, and they need it now, right? Because this is the window is not exactly getting wider here. So they need all these guys, Trey Turner, everybody, to be at their best if they have a shot.
You mentioned the mound visit. Kids, when they play baseball, love the mound visit. Is there a value to all of the guys from the infield coming around? And as an outfielder, were you jealous of when they would go have the mound visit?
Oh yeah, I talk about it every a couple of weeks about how I wish I sprinted from center field during a mound visit and just joined in and just saw the faces of people like, what's this guy doing here? It's yeah. Well, outfielders have their own visits sometimes. Even during the break, they'll come together. We're not really talking about a whole lot of stuff. Occasionally, I'll leave them with something like, "Hey, play a little shallower." But there is a lot to be involved in the infield because there's a lot of times it might be a bunt situation, it might be what you're doing on pickoffs, it might be just a reset, or how do you like the positioning? Do you want me to pitch more in? I mean, there's so much that goes into it that I think there is a lot that every infielder probably needs to be involved in. And eventually, maybe the pitching coach comes out and says, "Okay, what's going on here?"
All right. So you are going to be a busy man in the upcoming weeks, as if your travel isn't enough. You
As if he's not busy, but any other time.
seriously, but I mean, he told us before we talked all the different things he's going to be doing around the All-Star game. I thought it was exciting that it's in Philly. It's even more exciting that Doug Glanville is going to be on the call for what, home run derby. They could tell us everything that you are doing around the
Yeah.
All-Star game.
Yeah, I had to turn a few things down actually, which is a good thing. But of course, coming back to Philly is there's nothing like it, and that's exciting in and of itself. But I had a chance to coach in the futures game, but probably more figurehead. But the thing is, I'm calling a game in Pittsburgh on Saturday, and my family's going to be there, so I'm gonna probably drive in the crack of dawn, and I would have to get there like 6 7 a.m. So that didn't really work too well for me. But what I decided to do is go to the Players Alliance event on that Sunday night. And Curtis Grandison reached out, so it would be Claire Smith, a lot of Philadelphians, the usual Jimmy Rollins, the usual suspects. And so I'll be doing that kind of Philly-centric Players Alliance event on Sunday night. And yeah, I get to call the Derby and the All-Star game. I think it's like the fifth time or something. So I'm really enjoying that, especially in Philadelphia. A lot of great memories. And the second half starts in Philadelphia, so I'm trying to lobby my way to get part of that game with the Mets Phillies on that Thursday, but we'll see. But yeah, it's busy. I generally have weekends doing radio. I'm in Atlanta right now. I'll be in Philadelphia tomorrow, but the rhythm is kind of weekend driven. But there's all those exceptions, like July 4th All Star Game, opening day, Jackie Robinson Day. So it's a pretty intense travel schedule, and thank goodness for my wife who holds it down and keeps everything moving, because I'm certainly, I don't know what time it is right now.
Home run derby, they said they're going to change the rules. Which rule is better?
I kind of, it's one of those like remains to be seen. I understand like the clock factor, and should you throw another pitch and the ball lands, or you throw multiple pitch balls are in the air. I know when I'm working on that, especially the play-by-play, maybe Roxy Bernstein or Shambi or Carl Ravitch, there's like when there's multiple balls going, it's tough to keep up. So they're trying to create a little better rhythm to that. But that's the excitement of it. I mean, it's just amazing what these guys can do and how far they can hit the ball. So I'm excited to see how it plays out. But there is something to be said for like, okay, should we have a clock? Should we not have a clock? And how should we use the clock? And every year, I think they find something else and they tweak it again.
So the other reason we wanted to have you on is Jason and I have been having a discussion over the last couple of weeks about the incident in San Francisco, and you are, in our opinion, one of the most thoughtful people in sports, and the way that we landed on it was, the event, which was Pride Night in San Francisco, is about inclusion. And it seems that there are a few players that seem to be offended by that. Can you talk to us about your own feelings about that? And the same thing happened at the York Revolution minor league game.
Yeah, well, I think I had to do a little deeper dive on it because had to understand MLB's policy. I think you could start there
Mm-hmm.
because they really don't allow really any writing, right? They're supposed to, like, even when you say hi mom or anything like that, it's not really supposed to be on your hat. And they did give players the option to just wear their issued hat, right? So that's one thing to say. So if you had an issue or whatever it is, you could just put on the Dodgers hat, right? Or put on something else. So I think that's one thing to just underscore, that you have options, and they are recognizing that we're all trying to have freedoms, and we're trying to be able to freedom of speech and expression, and Colin Kaepernick and all, so it's like, okay, if we're kind of gonna, we're trying to at least be mindful of that and the rights that you have as Americans. At the same time, my standpoint of including the game and where it's inclusive for everybody, of course. I mean, we love baseball. It's therefore, to me, it's for everybody. and we celebrate everybody, we welcome everybody, and whatever that means to different groups of people. The game tries to figure out ways to do that, and it's not going to be perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to miss. All these things are part of the experience. And yes, is it a slippery slope? Can it be? Of course, but I think the idea is that as players, especially more and more in the last, say, decade or so, there's so much in the forefront of just including everybody and what that means. And when you're including someone, are you excluding someone? Are you stepping up? All these things. So I love the game to open its arms wider to people, whatever background everybody should feel like I can walk into this ballpark and enjoy a ball game, and I'm represented here. That should be a universal feeling for everyone, and I think that's just important. And I think in the '90s, the Giants and the Phillies, we were part of the first sort of teams to kind of meet together on the field around Pride Night. And I remember that was kind of a pioneering effort, gesture, and we were all out there, just Giants and Phillies, just talking about it. It was new from the standpoint of both teams coming together on the field, and but we understood then that it was just about especially in San Francisco, where there's a heightened sensitivity around that community, that it was important that we show as players that everybody's welcome here.
I guess the thing that I don't understand is, why is respect for others considered acceptance? Like, why can't you just say, okay, you do you? Like, why is that not okay?
Well, I think I don't know if I don't want to speak for them in terms of their argument, but it's like, okay, you being you is trampling on me, that's the whatever my beliefs are, and is it, like, I mean, you can, I'm sure you can get many theologians to debate on, is that actually the case? Is it not? All these things that come into our understanding of where this comes from. There's so many ways we could kind of lazily exclude people. We could come up with ways and say, look, I mean, Jackie Robinson breaks in, and it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, there was literally a color barrier, right? So there was a literal wall, and there's times where if you go back in American history, let's talk about integration as a good example. So when there was a definite period of time where we were segregated, and when integration became the law of the land, then there was all these public swimming pools across America that had to now allow Black families and Black people and children to swim in the pools. A lot of communities chose to fill that pool up with cement. They were like, we'd rather not have a pool at all than to bring you in. And so it's like, I mean, so it is consistent with our history that we respond to different and change and others and all these things in ways that are not exactly constructive and actually hurt yourself more than anything else. And that's unfortunate, but it's not something that's unusual in our history. We fought, even when we were on June 19th, Juneteenth yesterday, Texas and many states fought to the death. They fought for a couple of years, even after it was the law. They were like, no, we're not going to do this. I mean, integration, by the way, didn't happen like that. Hospitals didn't do it. They fought this for decades. There's places still fighting it, right? So I guess I'm saying that as like, I'm not surprised. I'm also trying to respect that, yes, where are the lines between my freedom and your freedom and freedom of speech? But I try to come back to the idea that the game should be for everyone. And what does that mean? Whatever that means, everybody should feel welcome. And that's sort of the baseline. And I know for me, it wouldn't have been hard for me to wear a pride hat or, any hat really. But I think it's like, but I guess the question then becomes, well, would I wear a Confederate flag on my hat? If someone's saying pride in the Confederacy, it's like, that is that exclusionary? Is that actually a group of people? Is that something that's who you are? Or is that, so I think that we need more understanding about what identity is about and the difference between like a political affiliation or a misinterpretation of something, or a trope, or versus like people who are, literally to who their core, who they are, black, white, religion, faith, gender, all these different things that are immutable characteristics in many respects.
So how do you deal with that in the locker room? You have all these different personalities. The locker room to me is like the great melting pot. Sports has created this, but you do see that there can be fractures in a locker room, and how do you avoid them? I mean, just off the baseball subject, you have the Giants, and there's political issues between players. How do you just not talk about it in the locker room, or is there? Does it take leadership of somebody in that locker room to bring people together to get people to just understand each other and respect each other?
Well, I think it definitely takes leadership. I generally found that a lot of places just don't talk. That's just the way to deal with it. Play baseball, and look, we know there's the constant cycle in our country about this myth about like, oh well, don't talk about it. Like if you don't talk about racism, it doesn't exist. But there's all this history of not talking about it, and it's still existing, right? So it doesn't change if you're not identifying it and understand these things. And so that's the challenge. Now the question is, do you do it in a workplace? Do you do it on a baseball team? Do you do it in, and like how much you engage on these topics? And that's where the leadership comes in, because leadership has to figure out a way to have everybody pull in the same direction, respecting that everybody's coming from different walks of life. And that's not necessarily easy, but there is something to be said. Like you could be fighting all day. I played on teams that got along great, didn't get along great, and we still won or still lost. So you could still be at each other and still figure out a way to win a ball game. And I'm not saying that's comfortable or necessarily great, but so that's where leadership comes into play. Like, hey, we're all on the same team. And but it's very difficult today with all the information on your phone and quotes and gotcha social media to be able to keep this out, this negativity, somewhat respect out. And because it's just out there, it's constantly out there. And all you have to do is, like, one of my former teammates, he's like, do you know how many people I've like unliked in Facebook and all these people since like the last couple political cycles? He's like, these are people I played with for 10 years. And so, it's a trying time. And I know it would be hard to play today. I do think it would be really difficult.
Which I'll just be honest, as somebody who's worked in and around politics for 2 decades, is more concerning for me, because then we silo ourselves off more. We get
Yeah.
into our own reinforcement loops where we aren't challenged by people's opinions who don't agree with us. So people just get more set in their ways, as opposed to having to explain whether those ways actually make sense.
And then the question just becomes, where can you do this, right? Where, it's like there's workplaces, and it depends on what state you're in. If you're in the state of Connecticut, they expanded First Amendment protections in the workplace. That's by case law. So it depends on where you are too. And so I think that, yes, I believe I'm definitely of the mind broadly that you have to engage in the truth of our history, right? To really move forward.
Right.
You have to figure out ways to accept all people, because the bottom line is, like, I just did this documentary on the Indianapolis clowns. That is American history. Yes, it's Black history. Yes, it's this, but it's American history, by which we need to understand, like, the exclusion and keeping people out, and what that looks like as policy, as governance of, and how it just metastasizes into things that create all these inequities. And yes, the Negro Leagues was also an example of, well, you didn't let me play in your league, so I found my own league, and we had a community and we had an economy. And once it got to a certain level, people kind of took it. And basically, I appreciate Jackie Robinson and the story, but remember, the Negro Leagues ended like a decade later. It was over because all the businesses and all the talent was drained from these leagues. So yes, it's, you have to be able to be like, more than just say, hey, come on our side of the fence, because our side of the fence is better because we've engineered it this way due to discrimination and all these things, or come on, and then we're all going to be part of this experience. But then it takes a certain honesty about why it was inequitable in the first place. And a lot of times that's a very difficult conversation, because it involves going back many generations of time that people try to disassociate with, like, oh, that was my ancestors, or that was all these things when the vestiges of that time exist today. And so whether the San Francisco Giants, whether whatever team, like you're in this world where these things are still present and still problematic and still institutionalized. And you may not be able to solve it on a baseball team, but you have a certain platform and an opportunity. And that's where I go back to leadership has to figure out the way to be able to move that forward constructively. Very, very challenging.
Doug Glanville, you always help us think about more than just balls and strikes. We are grateful for the time we get with you. Safe travels and great calls, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys, great to be on the Heart of Sports. Appreciate it.